My name is Georg Steinberger, and my guest today is a well-known figure in the semiconductor world, a technology expert and influencer. Hello, Marco Mezger.
Hello, Georg. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Hey, Marco, do me a favor. At the beginning of the interviews, I always ask for a 30-second pitch on what you do. So, what's your elevator pitch?
Sure, clear. I'm a global entrepreneur, investor, and advisor with over 25 years of experience in the semiconductor industry. I'm born in Germany. I live in Taipei, Taiwan, and travel from here the world. With this unique understanding of the global semiconductor industry, I have resulted in a track record to work in various companies and be a matchmaker in the industry. So I'm focusing mainly on memory technologies and have also built up a sizable follower base on LinkedIn, where I share on a regular basis updates about our beloved semiconductor industry. So besides this, I'm the CEO and EVP of Neumonda, the president of Memphis Electronic, and the CEO and founder of APIS4, all companies related to semiconductor and memory industry.
That was a 2 minutes pitch, and it seems that you are a multifunctionaire, as we called it back in the good old socialist days.
It was 40
Hey,
seconds, Georg.
yeah, okay, good. Hey, let's get started. Everyone and his brother at the moment seems to talk about the semiconductor market. So it has arrived in the Tagesschau and in the evening news, and a lot of people are talking about the chips industry, not the semiconductor industry. But um, at the moment, I get the feeling that everyone thinks we are facing a terrible decline in the semiconductor market. Can you put that a little bit in perspective for us?
Yes, I think, yes, it's a decline, of course, but I think you and I, we work very long in this industry, and I think we have seen also steeper declines than this, right? So I think to put this in perspective, what has happened the last 2 years before this decline has started was also not normal, right? So I think we have probably a little bit of a correction where probably what happened in these 2 years, like the growth normally would be in 4 years. And so we stretch it out a little bit and we have some correction on this. But I'm not too worried because I would say in our industry, everybody should be used to this cyclical because of the high capex, like the investment for the companies and also the time to ramp up the production.
Yeah, I think there's always fundamental mismatch between demand and supply just because of the complexity of the industry. And as you mentioned, the amount of investment that goes into semiconductor fabs nowadays. And then, of course, the black box cycle. So if you put something into a fab, it comes out 5 months later. And therefore, you really want to know as a manufacturer that the orders that you put in a very expensive process are at the end, of course, taken. But I have this theory about the two worlds in the semi market. Since a couple of years, I see sort of this decoupling between the leading edge on the one side and the normal semiconductor market on the other side. So leading edge, I mean mainly memory and processors who are on a completely different track in terms of geometries like 3 nanometers, 2 nanometers, whatever you have here, and the normal market, which is playing in a completely different world, like 25 nanometers upwards for microcontrollers, or in the case of analog, even other geometries. So what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's definitely like a different track because if we're talking right now, the market is going down and everything is in oversupply, this statement is just not correct, right? Because I think there are still customers who are looking for specific FPGAs or they're
Yeah.
looking, for example, for some microcontrollers. They are not getting it, but unfortunately, they are also connected to, in some regards, to what you mentioned, to logic or to memory, right? So if a customer cannot build, especially in the last 2 years, because he's missing, let's say, the golden screw, and this can be a 10-cent part or can be a $1,000 part. If he doesn't have the two matching parts, he cannot have the final product. So that's a big
Yeah.
challenge. And I think for memory, I would say in memory, it's more normal about this, right? With this volatility because of the commodity nature of the product, and also the few big guys in the oligopoly, they get too excited when basically the market is good. They spend tons of money on capex, and then when the market basically goes down, they're like, oh, we need to cut it, we need to cut it, right? It's just like, so they never really match it, and no tool really has made them help, to optimize it, even with less players. So I would say yes, there is definitely like a different view. And as you know, especially when you look in industrial, automotive, specialty, we have like double digit growth rates, where in comparison, for example, smartphone, notebooks, we are kind of on a saturation where we only have kind of replacement business, right? Which was before days
Yeah,
always a big driver.
absolutely true. And especially for Europe, Europe has I would say, a different industry structure. So not the computer communications and consumer market is defining the European semiconductor market, but automotive and industrial. And here I see the current decline as a rather moderate slowdown from a record year, mainly driven by the inventory digestion and by the struggle to get everything produced. I hear from a lot of customers that they have a bigger problem in finding actually skilled workers and finding the additional capacity to build what they have on the order books. The question is, what is the situation in Asia and specifically in China as the biggest, let's say, market for semiconductor consumption?
Right. I mean, in China, especially, I mean, the numbers, if you look at the smartphone market or you look at a mobile device market like notebooks or PC market, I mean, we have seen like double-digit reduction basically since last year. And also for this year, when we are lucky in China, we probably would be flat, right? And this is already a quite positive sign, if it would be flat. Because at the end of the day, the consumer driving a lot of these semiconductor consumption. And so
Sure.
there, the pain was felt probably more than in Europe, where we have a huge industrial automotive industry who suffered basically the last 2 years to get enough attention and parts because they don't have this high volume, right? That's the big issue
Yeah.
with allocation, the big guys getting it. But the industrial people, they are the ones sometimes who are not getting it, and they need to find other sources and opportunity how to get the parts.
Absolutely. Some animals are more equal, as usual, huh? Well,
Correct, that's true.
this also has led to a situation, specifically here in Europe, where distribution seemed to have been on a totally different track than the overall market. So, just the last 2 years, distribution in Europe, in euro, grew by 72%.
Mhm.
Volume delivery grew by only 50%, so the rest was price increases. A lot of people were, let's say, not so pleased about NCNR and that kind of things. But I was wondering if the situation in distribution in Asia is similar, so that the distribution is actually much more dynamic than the rest of the market, and if you had any insights why that might be the case.
Well, I think the European distribution business is probably a little bit more resilient because of the structure of the customer base, right? We don't have these high volume consumer customers basically who are using the
Absolutely right.
products. And I think another point I also would consider, Georg, is I believe that in the next few years we see some more reshoring, right? So we see probably some electronic manufacturing production moving because of geopolitics to European and US region. So we have seen this in the USA with some numbers, that there is like a growing production on a very, very small level, because I think there's also like in other regions in Asia where this is expanding. But I think in general, there's much more pain in the channel, I would say, in Asia, in China, because the whole concept of non-cancelable, non-returnable is not so strongly enforceable like it is probably in Europe, where companies doing this in order to get the support when there's an allocation, right? In China is very cutthroat, right? It's all about, okay, I
Yeah.
just want these parts and I want them now. So business in Europe is a little bit more predictable because the nature of the business basically which is produced. So that's why I would say the companies, the big guys in Asia, suffer more from this kind of sudden reduction in the consumer business.
Okay. Well, with NCNR, there's also a misunderstanding, in my opinion. NCNR is not something that distribution invented to protect their business. It's really something that is passed down by manufacturers to make sure that whatever they put in production is also taken afterwards. With all that big investment in new wafer fabs, you can't risk that customers are canceling orders right in the middle of production. So that misunderstanding is actually creating some friction here in Europe, but
Yes,
obviously
but
it's not.
I think,
Yep,
Georg, to be fair, I mean, everybody need to understand it goes in both ways, right? Because it's also a protection for
sure.
the customers, right? Because the distributor would guarantee them you definitely get the product no matter what. And no matter what means if price goes up or down, I agree with you on this pricing and I do it. So it's kind of a mutual trust, which is not favoring the one or the other. It just depends on how the market situation is. So it's kind of a
Yeah.
risk assessment you do there.
100% true. So I have another question regarding the electronic supply chain. So it's a
Uh-huh.
relatively complicated matter, 100 million or 200 million different parts times 2 million medium-sized to big customers who are putting everything and his brother on a PCB. So the complexity of that combination will always lead to a situation that something is always missing. Yeah. The
Right.
fundamental mismatch of demand and supply, as I mentioned in the beginning. So what I'd like to understand, so since this is really the topic that I'm interested in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
is the digitalization of the electronic supply chains. I'm
Mm-hmm.
working for Sourceability, and they are
Mm-hmm.
offering tools like Source Engine and like
Mm-hmm.
Data Link, an
Mm-hmm.
analytics tool, which is quite powerful. So the experience of the last 2 years, what do you think is missing in the digitalization of the electronic supply chain? Something must be missing, otherwise we wouldn't be in big trouble all the time. How do you see the state of maturity on the customer side, and also on, let's say, maybe as a difference between Asia and Europe, on Asian customers? How far are they in digitalizing their supply chain and using tools like Source Engine or Data Link or others?
Okay. So I think what is missing is adoption, right? So I think the technology is out there, tools are out there. And frankly speaking, I believe with AI, artificial intelligence, to be able to get access to this data or to these interfaces with a better user face, I think this will be one of the driving force in the futures. So because if you think about when we learned last year about ChatGPT, it was kind of the first time where we had like an interaction with a software or with a tool where you can ask normal
Yeah.
questions and basically you get it out and people is like, wow, they call it the iPhone moment or another iPhone moment. What is happening there? And I think I agree with you. I think this kind of digital supply chain and using this and integrate this adoption is still very low. This doesn't mean that the technology is not there or that the technology is already matured. It's more like that people are in a certain habit, how they're using this, how they have processes. And especially also in Asia, if you look, there's a lot with SOPs, there are certain structures, what they would follow, where you need to bring the value and bring these technology in front of people and show it to them. I think there still needs to be a lot of kind of evangelist work, right? Where people really say,
Yes.
okay, how can I help you? What data I'm using to create value for you in regards to pricing or availability? I think that's pricing and availability. These are the two main factors normally which supply chain is driving. And from my understanding, this is what these platforms also providing.
So that's exactly what we are trying to do currently with Source Engine and Data Link, creating
Uh-huh.
more transparency on the supply chain, but also with the addition now of all kinds of different APIs. We try to really make it easier for customer to really reap the benefits of efficiency in processes in simple transaction in the transactional part of the distribution business. And well, adoption rate could be better, but as you said, there is sometimes a matter of how we communicate it, but sometimes it's also a matter of not being too dependent on one source. I
Right.
think I understand that. But thanks for the insights. I'm curious to learn more about how Asian distributors are handling this. But let's switch gears a little bit to really stick within our time frame. The
Uh-huh.
CHIPS Act.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere is uh, governments are involving themselves in the semiconductor market and put
Uh-huh.
out millions or billions to support and underscore the importance of the semiconductor industry. What will the
Right.
impact be if we continue like that?
Well, I think our industry is already very complex, right? So with another player coming in who is even more unpredictable than supply and demand, hashtag politics, this is really, really challenging because it can change from one day to another, and everything what you have set up for many years, in order for tax optimization, manufacturing capability, is basically history. So you need to
Yeah.
reassess this. And I think this is probably where, especially the industry, is still going through. I think we are not there yet because even some of the regulations, there's always sometimes some fine tuning coming later. Because, for example, if there's a loophole identified, then, for example, the US put another sanction on this. And I'll say that the people, the stakeholders in the industry, they have to address this, right? They have to understand, okay, what can I not do, right? Because I think we still are able to do global trade, and I strongly believe in global trade that we also will continue to do this. But these kind of barriers, they are not completely clear, right? So they will be announced, and then everybody is in shock and doing some actions, and then
Yeah.
basically it's readjusted. And this is a huge, huge challenge where I believe that in the future the volatility might get even more and quickly or spiked. So you need to have intelligent supply chain solutions.
Well, I couldn't agree more. If you look at the announcements of investment in the semiconductor business over the next couple of years, that sounds like an overinvestment. But I think at the moment it's more like an over announcement. What in reality will be invested may be lower. And one thing is also for sure, if you take a global industry like ours, which needs globality for its critical mass, for its profitability. If you take it to a regional approach, it will be not as efficient as it should be, and second, much more expensive because somebody has to pay the bill for all this taxpayer money. It will certainly, let's say, create disruption and friction in the market. We don't know yet how far it will go, but let's see. And so leads me to the last question. What is your expectation for the current year? So 2023, on a global perspective, you are looking at the global market totally. I look at the European market, which is much more moderate. But what's your expectation? What is your expectation on 2023?
Well, I'm an optimist. Let's put it in this way. So I believe that when we look into the second half of the year, that with Q2 we really hit kind of the bottom, especially in the
Okay.
memory market. If you look, the capex in the memory market is the lowest since 8 years. And of course, this will have an effect in the next round about 18 months that we might run into challenges again when demand in consumer area coming back. And I think this readjustment, this has a lot to do with the geopolitics, right? So I think it's with recession fear, it's with inflation. There are many, many factors. And if if we're going over this hump, then I also strongly believe that basically the market will pull itself out, because I have one chart which I always is my cheer up chart. So this is a chart I think which is from McKinsey and Tech Insights, where they are predicting in this decade by 2030 like 1 trillion or above US dollar revenue in the semiconductor industry. So it's not just one who's basically saying this, so three independent ones. And I believe, based on all the technology, I think, Georg, especially artificial intelligence, it's mind-boggling. This is not Moore's law. This is like Moore's law on steroids. So the computing power, the memory, everything what is needed, and the ecosystem, edge computing, all of this combined together, because the data needs to also be generated somewhere. I believe that this is realistic. And so all of us in the industry have a very bright future if we follow our dreams.
Excellent. That was a very great finish. Thank you, Marco, for the interview. And stay online, please, for our little extra conversation.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. It was my pleasure.